The afternoon sun blazed through the window of the Yarrington Chronicle office, when Beatrice Ashford discovered that her entire life had been reduced to a collection of vicious lies printed in black ink for every soul in Nevada to read. Her hands trembled as she held the newspaper, her eyes scanning the words that seemed to burn themselves into her memory with each pass. The headline screamed across the front page in bold letters that felt like accusations. Schoolteacher's secret shame exposed. Miss Ashford's sordid past revealed. The article detailed supposed indiscretions that never happened, claimed she had been dismissed from her previous position in Sacramento for inappropriate conduct with a married man, alleged she had gambling debts that she sought to pay through manipulating wealthy families in town, and painted her as a woman of loose morals who had come to Yarrington to prey upon innocent citizens. None of it was true, not a single word. Beatrice had arrived in Yarrington 6 months ago in the spring of 1882, a 23-year-old woman with teaching credentials and recommendations from respected educators in California. She had left Sacramento not in disgrace but in grief, after her mother's death left her with nothing but memories and a need for a fresh start. The position at Yarrington's small schoolhouse had seemed like providence, a chance to build something meaningful in a growing community where children needed education, and she needed purpose. Now, someone had decided to destroy everything she had worked to create. The newspaper office smelled of ink and tobacco, and the man behind the desk, editor Harold Brennan, refused to meet her eyes as she stood before him demanding answers. His collar was stained with sweat despite the cooler temperature inside, and his fingers drummed nervously on the wooden surface. "Where did you get this information?" Beatrice asked, her voice steady despite the fury coursing through her veins. "Who told you these lies?" Brennan shuffled papers on his desk, a pathetic attempt at appearing busy. "A journalist never reveals his sources, Miss Ashford. The public has a right to know about those who are educating their children. The public has a right to the truth, which this certainly is not." She slapped the newspaper down on his desk. "I have never been dismissed from any position. I have no debts. I have never had inappropriate relations with anyone, married or otherwise. This is slander, Mr. Brennan, and you will print a retraction immediately." The editor finally looked up at her, and something in his expression made her blood run cold. There was no shame there, no regret. Only a calculated coldness that spoke of deliberate malice rather than journalistic error. "I stand by my reporting," he said flatly. "If you take issue with it, you are welcome to seek legal recourse." They both knew what that meant. A woman of modest means could never afford the lawyers needed to fight a libel case, especially not against a newspaper with connections throughout the territory. Brennan was counting on her powerlessness, banking on the fact that the damage was already done, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Beatrice left the office with her head high, though inside she felt as if she were crumbling. The streets of Yarrington stretched before her, familiar wooden buildings lining the dusty main thoroughfare. The town had been founded barely 20 years earlier as a trading post, growing slowly but steadily with the mining operations in the surrounding hills. It was small enough that everyone knew everyone else's business, which meant that by now, everyone had read the article. She could feel eyes on her as she walked, could hear the whispers that followed in her wake. "Mrs. Henderson pulled her daughter closer as Beatrice passed, as if proximity to a fallen woman might corrupt the child. Mr. Patterson, who owned the general store and had always greeted her warmly, suddenly found his shop window intensely interesting. Even the children playing in the street seemed to quiet as she approached, their games forgotten in favor of staring at the teacher who had become the town scandal. By the time Beatrice reached her small boarding house room, tears were streaming down her face. She collapsed onto her narrow bed and let herself sob, mourning not just her reputation but the life she had been building here. The schoolchildren she had grown to love, the small circle of friends she had begun to cultivate, the sense of belonging she had finally started to feel after months of loneliness, all of it was slipping away like sand through her fingers. The next morning brought fresh horrors. When she arrived at the schoolhouse, she found the door locked and a notice posted declaring that her services were no longer required. The school board had met in emergency session the previous evening and voted unanimously to terminate her employment, effective immediately. They could not, the notice stated in clipped formal language, allow a woman of questionable character to influence young minds. Beatrice stood before the locked door, staring at her reflection in the window glass. She saw a woman with honey-colored hair pinned back in a practical style, gray eyes that looked haunted, a face that had always been called pleasant if not beautiful, wearing a modest blue dress that she had made herself. She looked like exactly what she was, a respectable schoolteacher. But the newspaper had turned her into something else entirely, and appearances meant nothing against the power of the printed word. She did not know that across town, a cowboy named Robert Sullivan was reading the same article with a frown deepening between his dark brows. Robert had been in Yerington for just over a year, working on the Double Creek Ranch that sprawled across the valley north of town. At 26, he had spent most of his adult life moving from ranch to ranch, following work and avoiding attachments. He was tall and lean with the sun-weathered skin of a man who lived outdoors, dark hair that was always slightly too long, and the kind of quiet intensity that made people either trust him immediately or give him a wide berth. He had met Beatrice Ashford exactly once, 3 weeks earlier, under circumstances that made the newspaper's claims seem not just false but offensively absurd. It had been a Sunday afternoon, and Robert had ridden into town for supplies. He was leading his horse down Main Street when he heard shouting and saw smoke beginning to billow from the rear of the general store. Without thinking, he had sprinted toward the commotion, arriving to find Mr. Patterson frantically trying to move stock away from a fire that had started in a storage room. Robert had been helping to form a bucket brigade when he noticed a woman climbing through a window on the second floor where the Patterson family lived above the shop. But she was not escaping. She was going in. "Someone's still inside," a voice had shouted. "The Patterson boy." He was playing up there. Before anyone could stop her, Beatrice Ashford had disappeared through the window. Robert had not known her name then, had only seen a woman in a Sunday dress doing something incredibly brave and incredibly dangerous. He had run into the building through the front door, fighting through smoke to reach the stairs. He found her on the second-floor landing, bent double and coughing, with 6-year-old Timothy Patterson clutched in her arms. The boy was crying but conscious, and Beatrice was shielding him with her body as flames licked at the walls around them. The stairs behind Robert were already burning, cutting off their escape route. "The window!" Robert had shouted, grabbing her arm and pulling her back toward the bedroom she had entered through. He boosted the boy through first, handing him to waiting arms below, then helped Beatrice climb out before following himself. They had tumbled onto the awning over the store's back entrance, then dropped to the ground as the bucket brigade finally got the fire under control. Beatrice had been shaking, her dress torn and stained with smoke, her hair coming loose from its pins. But her first words had been, "Is Timothy all right? Is he hurt?" The boy had been fine, frightened but unharmed thanks to her quick action. Mr. Patterson had thanked her with tears in his eyes, had called her a hero in front of half the town. And now, 3 weeks later, he would not even look at her on the street. Robert set the newspaper aside and stood up from the bunkhouse steps where he had been reading. The article did not match the woman he had encountered that day, the one who had risked her life without hesitation to save a child. The claims about her character seemed not just wrong but deliberately malicious, and something about that made anger burn hot in his chest. He was not a man who involved himself in town politics or social dramas. He kept his head down, did his work, and moved on when the time came. But this felt different. This felt like something that needed addressing. Robert found Beatrice that evening in the town's small church. It was empty except for her, sitting in a back pew with her head bowed. He removed his hat as he entered, his boots loud on the wooden floor. She looked up at his approach, and he saw wariness in her gray eyes. She probably expected more accusations, more judgment. "Miss Ashford," he said, his voice quiet in the empty space. "I do not believe we have been properly introduced. My name is Robert Sullivan. I work at the Double Creek Ranch." Recognition flickered across her face. "You were there," she said softly, "when the fire happened. You helped get Timothy out. We both did." He sat down in the pew in front of her, turning to face her. "I read the article in the Chronicle." Her expression closed off, walls slamming into place. "If you have come to add your condemnation to everyone else's, please save your breath. I have heard enough for one day. I came to say that I do not believe a word of it." She stared at him, clearly not understanding. "You do not even know me. I know that when a building was on fire and a child was trapped inside, you did not hesitate to put yourself in danger to save him. I know that takes a kind of character that cannot be faked." He met her eyes steadily. "I also know that articles like the one printed today are usually written for a reason, and that reason is rarely the truth." Tears welled in her eyes, the first crack in her composure. "Someone wanted to destroy me. I do not even know who or why. I have been nothing but proper since arriving here. I have tried to be a good teacher, a good neighbor, a decent person. And now everything I have worked for is gone, all because of lies." "Then we need to find out who started those lies and why," Robert said. "And we need to make people see the truth." "How?" The word came out bitter and broken. "Who will believe me over a newspaper? I am just a woman with no family, no connections, no power. Mr. Brennan can write whatever he wants, and there is nothing I can do about it." Robert was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he said, "Maybe you cannot do anything about what he wrote, but I can." Over the next 3 days, Robert Sullivan became an investigator. He started by visiting the Chronicle office himself, finding Harold Brennan at his desk amid stacks of papers and the ever-present smell of ink. "Mr. Brennan," Robert said, standing in the doorway with his hat in his hands, playing the part of a simple ranch hand. "I was hoping you might answer some questions about that article you printed, the one about the schoolteacher." Brennan looked up with an expression of mild annoyance. "What about it?" "Well, I am just curious about your sources. See, I was at the Patterson fire, and I saw Miss Ashford risk her life to save that boy. Does not seem like the kind of thing a person with bad character would do. What a person does in one moment does not erase their past," Brennan said dismissively. "I had reliable information about her background." "From who?" "As I told Miss Ashford, I do not reveal my sources." Robert nodded slowly as if accepting this. "I understand, professional ethics and all, but you did verify the information, right? Contacted her previous employers, checked records, that sort of thing." Something flickered in Brennan's expression, there and gone too quickly to identify. "My source was reliable enough not to require additional verification." "So that is a no," Robert said, his tone still casual but his eyes sharp. "You printed accusations that cost a woman her job and her reputation based on one person's word, without checking if any of it was true. "I do not appreciate your tone, Mr. Sullivan. If you have a complaint about the Chronicle's journalistic practices, you are welcome to take it up with the Territorial Press Association." "Oh, I am not complaining," Robert said, "just trying to understand how a newspaper works. See, where I come from, we call it gossip when someone spreads stories about another person without proof. But I guess when you print it, it becomes news." He left before Brennan could respond, but he had learned what he needed to know. The editor had not verified anything. That meant the lies had come from a single source, someone who wanted Beatrice destroyed and had found a willing accomplice in a newspaper editor who valued sensationalism over truth. Next, Robert visited the telegraph office. The clerk, a young man named Danny who occasionally played cards with some of the ranch hands, was happy to talk once Robert bought him a drink at the saloon. "Funny thing," Robert said casually. "I heard the Chronicle got some information about the schoolteacher from outside sources." "You handle all the telegrams that come into town, right?" Danny nodded, taking a long pull from his beer. "Every single one. Nothing comes through that line without me seeing it." "So did Brennan receive any telegrams recently, maybe from Sacramento, asking about Miss Ashford's background?" The clerk shook his head. "Not a single one. I would remember that, especially with all the fuss about the article. Brennan has not sent or received any telegrams in over a month." That confirmed it. Brennan had not even attempted to verify his information. The entire article was based on lies fed to him by someone local, someone who wanted Beatrice gone. But who? And why? Robert spent the next day talking to people around town carefully and casually asking questions. He spoke to the school board members, the parents of Beatrice's students, the other boarders at the house where she rented her room. Most people had nothing but good things to say about her, at least in the past tense. She had been kind, competent, dedicated to the children. No one had ever seen her behave improperly with anyone, let alone a married man. She attended church regularly, kept to herself otherwise, lived modestly within her means. "Such a shame," Mrs. Martinez said, shaking her head. "She was good with my Rosa. The girl was finally learning to read." "Do you believe what the paper said about her?" Robert asked. Mrs. Martinez hesitated, and he could see the conflict on her face. "I do not want to believe it, but why would the newspaper print it if it was not true?" "Maybe because someone wanted people to think it was true," Robert suggested. "Did Miss Ashford have any enemies? Anyone who might want to hurt her?" "She barely knew anyone well enough to make enemies. She has only been here a few months." That was what everyone said. Beatrice had been friendly but reserved, professional in her conduct, careful to avoid any appearance of impropriety, which made the timing of the article even more suspicious. Someone had waited until she was settled, until she had something to lose before striking. The answer came from an unexpected source. Robert was at the general store, buying tobacco, when he overheard Mr. Patterson talking to his wife in the back room. The door was slightly ajar and their voices carried clearly. "I feel terrible about it," Patterson was saying. "After what she did for Timothy, turning my back on her feels like the worst kind of betrayal." "But what choice do we have?" Mrs. Patterson replied. "If we associate with her now, people will talk about us too." "And anyway," Constance said a lot of things, and I am starting to wonder if any of them were true." Robert's attention sharpened. Constance. That was a name he had heard before. He paid for his tobacco and left, his mind working through the implications. On his way out of town, he passed the large house on the hill that belonged to the Whitmore family. Marcus Whitmore owned the most successful mine in the area and wielded considerable influence in Yerington. He had a wife and 2 daughters, the eldest of whom was named Constance. Robert had seen Constance Whitmore around town, always dressed in the latest fashions from San Francisco, always surrounded by other young women who hung on her every word. She was considered the belle of Yerington society, such as it was in a mining town. And according to gossip he had heard in the bunkhouse, she had her sights set on someone. The pieces started to fall into place. That evening, Robert visited Beatrice at her boarding house. The landlady, Mrs. Chen, let him in with obvious reluctance, clearly worried about the appearance of a man visiting her now disgraced tenant. But she showed him to the small parlor where Beatrice sat with a book she was not really reading. "Mr. Sullivan," Beatrice said, standing quickly, "what are you doing here? If anyone sees you visiting me, your reputation will be damaged too." "Let them see," Robert said. "I have been asking questions around town, Miss Ashford. I think I know who started the rumors about you." Her eyes widened. "Who?" "Constance Whitmore." Beatrice sank back into her chair, her face showing comprehension mixed with confusion. "But why? I barely know her. We have spoken perhaps 3 times since I arrived." "That is what I could not figure out either until I started thinking about the timing. The article came out last week." "What happened right before that?" Beatrice thought for a moment, then shook her head. "Nothing out of the ordinary. School, church on Sunday, the usual routines. And the fire. You saved Timothy Patterson in front of half the town. I do not see what that has to do with Constance Whitmore." Robert sat down across from her. "After the fire, people called you a hero. They talked about your bravery, your quick thinking. You became someone notable in town, someone people admired, and Miss Whitmore does not like competition for attention. That seems like a petty reason to destroy someone's life. Petty reasons can lead to terrible actions, especially when the person acting has power and no conscience." He leaned forward, his expression serious. "I do not have proof yet, but I am going to get it. And when I do, I am going to make sure everyone in this town knows the truth." "Why are you doing this?" Beatrice asked, her voice soft. "You do not know me. This is not your fight." Robert was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "My mother was a schoolteacher in Colorado. When I was 12, one of the fathers in town decided he wanted her position for his sister. So he started rumors about my mother, similar to what has been said about you. By the time the truth came out, she had lost her job and her reputation. We had to move 3 times before we found somewhere that would hire her again." He met Beatrice's eyes. "She never really recovered from it. The whispers followed her for years. It broke something in her, knowing that people believed those lies." "I am sorry," Beatrice whispered. "I could not help her then. I was just a kid, but I can help you now." He stood up, settling his hat back on his head. "Someone needs to stand up for the truth, Miss Ashford. Might as well be me." After Robert left, Beatrice sat in the quiet parlor and felt something unfamiliar blooming in her chest. Hope. And something else, something she was not quite ready to name yet. The next day, Robert did something bold. He went to the Chronicle office with a handwritten letter and $20. "I would like to purchase an advertisement in your next edition," he told Harold Brennan. The editor looked up from his desk, surprised. "An advertisement for what?" "For the truth." Robert set the letter on the desk. "I want this printed on the front page, in the same position where you printed your article about Miss Ashford." Brennan picked up the letter and began to read. His face darkened with each line. Robert had written a detailed account of the fire at Patterson's store, describing how Beatrice had climbed into a burning building to save a child while others stood frozen with fear. He described her conduct in the classroom, based on interviews with parents and students. He noted that the Chronicle had printed serious accusations without verifying a single fact, relying solely on anonymous sources that might have personal motives for spreading lies. He called for anyone with actual evidence of wrongdoing to come forward, and he challenged Harold Brennan to reveal his source or admit that he had been used to spread malicious gossip. And at the end, Robert had written, "I will defend Miss Ashford's name and character always, because I know that truth matters more than gossip, and courage matters more than reputation. If anyone wishes to dispute what I have written here, they may find me at the Double Creek Ranch, where I will be happy to discuss the matter." "I am not printing this," Brennan said flatly, dropping the letter back on the desk. "That is your right. But I have already made 20 copies of it, and I will personally distribute them to every business and home in Yerington if necessary." Robert met the editor's eyes without flinching. "You can print it and get paid, or I can spread it for free, and you lose the chance to show that the Chronicle cares about fairness. Your choice." For a long moment, the two men stared at each other. Finally, Brennan said, "If I print this, the Whitmores will be furious." So he had confirmed what Robert suspected. If you do not print it, a lot more people than the Whitmores are going to be asking questions about your journalistic ethics. 2 days later, the Chronicle published Robert's letter on the front page. By noon, it was all anyone in Yerington could talk about. Beatrice learned about it when Mrs. Chen brought a copy to her room, her expression transformed from disapproval to cautious sympathy. "You might want to read this, dear," she said, handing over the newspaper. As Beatrice read Robert's words, tears blurred her vision. He had defended her with facts and passion, had put his own name and reputation on the line to call out the lies that had destroyed hers. The letter was eloquent and forceful, painting a picture of a brave, dedicated teacher who had been wronged by cowardly gossip. It made her sound like exactly what she was, a good person who had been unfairly maligned. But more than that, it showed that someone believed in her. Someone was willing to fight for her when she had felt utterly alone. She was still sitting there, clutching the newspaper, when there was a knock on her door. When she opened it, she found Robert standing in the hallway with his hat in his hands and a slight smile on his face. "Did it work?" he asked. Instead of answering, Beatrice threw her arms around him in an impulsive embrace. He stiffened in surprise for a moment, then wrapped his arms around her, holding her as she cried against his shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for believing me. Thank you for fighting for me when I could not fight for myself." "You are stronger than you think," Robert said quietly, "but everyone needs someone in their corner sometimes." When she finally stepped back, wiping her eyes, she asked, "What happens now?" "Now we wait and see who responds." If Miss Whitmore was behind this, she will not be able to resist defending herself. People like that cannot stand being questioned. He was right. By the next morning, Constance Whitmore had published her own letter in the Chronicle, a breathless response that protested her innocence while somehow managing to sound guilty. She claimed that she had merely shared concerns with the editor based on information she had received from a friend in Sacramento. And if that information proved incorrect, it was certainly not her fault. She painted herself as a concerned citizen trying to protect the town's children, not as someone with malicious intent. But in her defensiveness, she had admitted to being Brennan's source. And her vague reference to a friend in Sacramento made people start asking questions. Several citizens wrote their own letters to the Chronicle demanding that this mysterious friend be identified and their claims verified. The tide was beginning to turn. Robert continued his campaign by speaking to anyone who would listen. He stood on street corners and in the saloon, in the church after services, and at the general store, telling anyone who would hear about what he had witnessed at the fire. He talked about Beatrice's dedication to her students, about the testimonials he had gathered from parents who praised her teaching. He pointed out that not one person could provide actual evidence of any wrongdoing, only repetitions of the newspaper's claims. Slowly, people began to reconsider. Mrs. Martinez was the first to publicly state that she had been wrong to turn her back on Miss Ashford. Then Mr. Patterson stood up in the saloon one evening and declared that he was ashamed of how he had treated the woman who saved his son's life. Other parents followed, admitting that perhaps they had been too quick to believe the worst. The school board called an emergency meeting. Robert attended, standing in the back of the room as the members debated. The vote to reconsider Beatrice's dismissal passed, though not unanimously. Some members, particularly those with close ties to the Whitmore family, still argued that the accusations had created too much controversy to allow her return. It was Beatrice herself who settled the matter. She appeared at the meeting, uninvited but determined, and addressed the board directly. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice steady despite the trembling of her hands, "I understand that some of you still have doubts about my character. I cannot force you to believe in my innocence. But I can tell you that I love teaching, and I love the children of this town. I have worked hard to earn their trust and to help them learn. If you will give me another chance, I will prove through my actions that the accusations against me were false. And if you will not, then I will leave Yerington knowing that at least I tried to defend my name and my honor." Her quiet dignity, her refusal to beg or grovel, impressed even her detractors. The board voted again, and this time the decision was in her favor. She could return to the schoolhouse, effective immediately, but the battle was not over. Constance Whitmore, furious at being exposed as a liar and gossip, convinced her father to apply pressure on the school board to reverse their decision. Marcus Whitmore threatened to withdraw his financial support from the school unless Beatrice was dismissed again. He was powerful enough that his threats carried weight, and suddenly Beatrice's position was in jeopardy once more. Robert heard about this from the ranch foreman, who had been in town when Whitmore made his ultimatum. The cowboy rode back to the Double Creek Ranch with anger burning in his chest. This had gone on long enough. He found Beatrice at the schoolhouse, preparing her classroom for the students who would return the next day. She looked up as he entered, her expression brightening at the sight of him. Over the past week, he had become her constant defender, and something had grown between them that neither had fully acknowledged yet. "I heard about Whitmore," Robert said without preamble. "He has no right to threaten the school board like that." "He has every right," Beatrice said wearily. "His money pays for half the school's expenses. Without his support, they cannot afford to stay open. Then we need to find other support, other donors. In a town this size, the mining operation provides most of the wealth and Whitmore controls that." She sat down at her desk, looking defeated. "Maybe I should just leave, Robert. Find somewhere else to teach, somewhere I can start fresh without all this conflict." "No." The word came out more forcefully than he intended. He crossed the room to stand in front of her desk. "You should not have to run because someone decided to lie about you. That is not justice. Sometimes there is no justice. Sometimes powerful people win and the rest of us just have to accept it. I do not accept it." He leaned forward, his hands flat on her desk. "And I am not going to let them drive you out without a fight." Beatrice looked up at him, and something in his expression made her breath catch. There was more than righteous anger in his eyes, more than simple determination to right a wrong. There was something personal, something that had been growing between them in the stolen moments they had shared over the past week. "Why does this matter so much to you?" she asked softly. "You have already done more than I ever could have asked. You have put your own reputation at risk to defend mine. If you keep fighting the Whitmores, you could lose your job. Marcus Whitmore has connections throughout the territory. He could make things difficult for you. Robert was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I told you about my mother, how lies destroyed her. But I did not tell you that before she died, she made me promise something. She made me swear that if I ever had the chance to stand up for someone being wrongly accused, I would do it. That I would not stay silent and let injustice happen when I had the power to stop it." He paused, then added more quietly, "But that is not the only reason anymore." "What is the other reason? I think you know." The air between them felt charged, full of unspoken words and unnamed feelings. Beatrice stood up, coming around the desk until she was standing close enough to see the flecks of amber in his dark eyes. "Tell me anyway," she whispered. "Because somewhere along the way, defending your name stopped being about righting a wrong and started being about protecting someone I care about." He reached out, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Someone who matters to me more than I expected anyone to matter. Robert." "You do not have to say anything," he said quickly. "I know the timing is terrible. You are dealing with enough without me adding complications. But I needed you to know that I am not doing this out of some abstract sense of justice anymore. I am doing it because She kissed him before he could finish, rising on her toes to press her lips to his in a gesture that was both impulsive and inevitable. For a moment, he was too surprised to respond. Then his arms came around her, pulling her close as he kissed her back with a tenderness that made her heart ache. When they finally separated, both were breathing hard. Beatrice rested her forehead against his chest, feeling his heart hammering beneath her cheek. "I care about you too," she admitted. "I think I started caring the day you first came to the church to tell me you believed me. No one else in this town was willing to give me a chance, but you did. You have been fighting for me when I could not fight for myself." How could I not care about someone like that? Robert tilted her chin up so he could look into her eyes. "Then we fight this together. Not just for your job, but for the life you deserve to have here. For both of us." The next day, Robert took a risk that could have backfired spectacularly. He went directly to the Whitmore house and asked to speak with Constance. She received him in the parlor, dressed in an expensive gown with her blonde hair perfectly arranged. She looked at him with barely concealed contempt, clearly viewing him as beneath her social station. "Mr. Sullivan," she said coldly, "I cannot imagine what business we might have to discuss." "I think you can," Robert replied, remaining standing since she had not invited him to sit. "You started the rumors about Miss Ashford. You fed lies to Harold Brennan knowing he would print them without verification. I want to know why." "I did no such thing. I merely shared information I received from a friend in Sacramento who does not exist," Robert interrupted. "I telegraphed several people in Sacramento who were listed in Miss Ashford's references. None of them have been in contact with you or with anyone else in Yerington asking about her. You made it all up." Constance's face flushed with anger. "You have no proof of that." "I have a telegram from the headmistress of the school where Miss Ashford previously taught. She confirms that Beatrice left in good standing after her mother's death, that there was never any scandal or dismissal, and that she would hire her back in a heartbeat if she returned to California." He pulled the telegram from his pocket. "I have similar statements from 2 other educators who worked with her. They are all dated and verified, so either your friend is a liar or you are." For a long moment, Constance said nothing. Then she stood abruptly, turning away from him to stare out the window. "You do not understand what it is like," she said finally, her voice bitter. "Living in a town this small where nothing ever happens and everyone knows everything about everyone. Being the daughter of Marcus Whitmore means I am supposed to be special, important. But then she arrived, this nobody from California, and suddenly people were talking about her instead of me. After the fire, people called her a hero. They looked at her with admiration that should have been mine. So you destroyed her reputation out of jealousy. Robert could not keep the disgust from his voice. I wanted her gone. I wanted people to stop talking about how brave and wonderful she was. Is that so terrible? Constance turned back to face him, her eyes glittering with tears that might have been genuine. I did not think it would go this far. I thought she would just leave quietly, that the rumors would make her uncomfortable enough to seek employment elsewhere. I did not expect her to have someone like you defending her. She should not have needed someone like me. She should not have been attacked in the first place. Robert stepped closer, his expression hard. Now you are going to fix what you broke. You are going to write a letter to the Chronicle admitting that you lied about Miss Ashford. You are going to explain that you made up the rumors because you were jealous of the attention she was receiving, and you are going to publicly apologize. I will do no such thing. Do you know what that would do to my reputation? My father would be furious. Then I will make sure every newspaper in Nevada Territory prints the evidence I have gathered. I will send copies to the Territorial Press Association and to every editor within 300 miles. By the time I am done, everyone will know that Constance Whitmore is a liar who tried to destroy an innocent woman's life out of petty jealousy. He met her eyes steadily. Your reputation will be finished either way. But if you admit the truth yourself and apologize, at least people might eventually forgive you. If I have to expose you, they never will. Constance sank back into her chair, her face pale. You are giving me no choice. You gave Miss Ashford no choice when you spread those lies. Now you get to experience what that feels like. 2 days later, the Chronicle published a letter from Constance Whitmore. In it, she admitted that she had fabricated the rumors about Beatrice Ashford out of jealousy and spite. She apologized for the harm she had caused and acknowledged that every accusation had been false. She asked for forgiveness, but did not expect to receive it. The letter sent shockwaves through Yerington. Marcus Whitmore was reportedly furious with his daughter, though he did not publicly comment on the situation. The social circle that had revolved around Constance collapsed overnight, with former friends distancing themselves from the scandal. Some people felt sorry for her, most did not. For Beatrice, the apology was bittersweet. Her name was cleared, her reputation restored, but the damage had been done. She had lost weeks of teaching time, had endured the pain of being shunned by people she had considered friends, had felt the soul-deep ache of injustice. An apology could not undo those things entirely, but Robert's presence made the difference. He was there when she returned to the schoolhouse for her first day back, standing outside with a bouquet of wildflowers he had picked that morning. "Thought you might want these for your desk," he said, looking almost shy as he handed them to her. "For a fresh start." Beatrice took the flowers, blinking back tears. "Thank you for everything. I do not know how I will ever repay you for what you have done." "You do not owe me anything," Robert said. "But if you would let me walk you home after school today, I would consider that payment enough." She smiled, the first genuine smile she had felt in weeks. "I would like that very much." The school day was better than she had dared hope. The children welcomed her back with enthusiasm that made her heart swell. They had missed her, and many of them had never believed the rumors in the first place. Their parents were more subdued, some openly apologetic, others simply trying to move forward without addressing the awkwardness of their previous behavior. Mrs. Martinez brought Rosa to school early so she could apologize personally. "I should have believed in you," she said, her eyes damp. "I knew in my heart that the accusations did not make sense, but I let fear and gossip override my better judgment. I am sorry, Miss Ashford." "You are forgiven," Beatrice said, meaning it. "People make mistakes. What matters is how we move forward from them." Throughout the day, more parents came to express their regret. Mr. Patterson brought an entire basket of supplies for the schoolhouse as a gesture of apology. By the time the final bell rang, Beatrice felt exhausted but hopeful. Her life in Yerington was not over. It was, perhaps, just beginning. True to his word, Robert was waiting outside when she finished cleaning the classroom. They walked together through the cooling evening, neither in a hurry to reach her boarding house. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, and the desert air smelled of sage and dust. "The children seemed happy to have you back," Robert observed. "They did. It felt good to be teaching again, to be doing something useful." She glanced at him. "What about you? Did you face any consequences for going up against the Whitmores?" "The ranch foreman was not pleased that I involved myself in town politics, but he did not fire me. Told me I had more guts than sense, which is probably true." He smiled slightly. "A few of the other ranch hands think I am crazy for risking everything to defend a woman's honor. They do not understand why it mattered so much. And what did you tell them? That some things are worth risking everything for." They walked in comfortable silence for a while. Then Beatrice said, "What happens now? Between us, I mean. You said you care about me, and I admitted I care about you. But we have both been so focused on clearing my name that we have not talked about what comes next." Robert stopped walking, turning to face her. The setting sun cast long shadows across his features, making his dark eyes look almost black. "I am not good with pretty words," he said. "I spend most of my time with cattle and horses, not people, but I know that I think about you constantly. I know that when I saw those lies printed about you, I felt angrier than I have ever felt in my life. I know that making you smile feels more important than just about anything else." He took her hands in his. "I also know that I am just a ranch hand with no prospects beyond my next paycheck, and you are an educated woman who deserves better than a cowboy who smells like horses half the time." Beatrice laughed, the sound surprising both of them. "Robert Sullivan, do you honestly think I care about any of that? You defended my name when no one else would. You fought for me, believed in me, stood by me through the worst experience of my life. That matters more than money or social standing or anything else. So you are saying you would not object to me courting you properly, taking you to church socials, maybe dinner at the hotel when I can afford it, walking you home when the weather is nice?" "I would not object at all." She squeezed his hands. "In fact, I would very much like that." He grinned, a rare expression that transformed his usually serious face. Then he leaned down and kissed her softly, right there on the street where anyone could see. Beatrice did not care. Let them see. Let them know that she had someone who loved her enough to defend her name, to fight for her, to stand beside her always. The courting that followed was sweet and old-fashioned, and exactly what Beatrice needed after the nightmare of the scandal. Robert came to town every Sunday after church to walk with her. He took her to dinner at the hotel, where they sat across from each other and talked for hours about everything and nothing. He brought her books from the ranch library, a surprisingly extensive collection that belonged to the owner. She baked him pies and cookies, discovering that he had an unexpected sweet tooth. They talked about their pasts, their hopes, their fears. Robert told her about growing up in Colorado, about his mother's struggle to maintain her dignity after the false accusations destroyed her reputation, about his father's death in a mining accident when Robert was 15. He talked about the years of drifting from ranch to ranch, never quite finding a place that felt like home. Beatrice shared her own history, the comfortable childhood in Sacramento with loving parents, her father's death from pneumonia when she was 16, the years helping her mother run a boarding house while completing her education. She talked about her love of teaching, about the satisfaction of watching children learn to read and write and think for themselves. She spoke of her mother's final illness, the grief of losing her last parent, the decision to leave California and seek a fresh start in Nevada. "I thought coming here would give me a chance to build something new," she said one evening as they sat on the steps of the schoolhouse watching the sunset. "Instead, I almost lost everything because of someone's jealousy." "But you did not lose everything," Robert pointed out. "You survived. You are still here, still teaching, still making a difference in these children's lives. That takes a strength most people do not have." "I survived because of you," she corrected. "Without you, I would have left in disgrace. I would have spent the rest of my life wondering if people thought those lies were true." "You would have survived regardless," Robert insisted. "I just helped speed up the process. Your character would have proven itself eventually." As autumn arrived in Yerington, bringing cooler temperatures and the first hints of color to the landscape, Robert realized he wanted more than casual courting. He wanted a future with Beatrice, a real life together. The problem was that he had almost no money saved. Ranch work paid poorly, and he had been sending part of his wages to his younger sister in Colorado, who was trying to afford her own education. He went to the ranch owner, Mr. Donovan, to ask about the possibility of better pay or a promotion to a position with more responsibility. Donovan, who had heard about Robert's defense of the schoolteacher and approved of his character, offered him a deal. "I have been thinking about expanding the operation," Donovan said, leaning back in his desk chair. "Opening a second ranch in the valley to the east. I need someone I can trust to manage it, someone who knows cattle and horses and can handle men. The pay would be better, and there would be a house that comes with the position. Think you might be interested." Robert could barely believe what he was hearing. "You are offering me a ranch manager position. You have proven you have integrity and courage, Sullivan. Those are rare qualities. I would rather have a man I can trust than someone with more experience but questionable character." Donovan named a salary that was nearly double what Robert currently made. "What do you say?" "I say yes, sir. Thank you, sir. I will not let you down." With a stable job and a real income, Robert felt ready to take the next step. He spent weeks planning, wanting everything to be perfect. He consulted with Mrs. Chen at the boarding house, with Mrs. Martinez, even with Mr. Patterson, getting advice on what Beatrice might like. The proposal happened on a December evening, 3 months after the scandal had first erupted. Robert had asked Beatrice to meet him at the schoolhouse after she finished her lessons. When she arrived, she found the classroom transformed. Candles flickered on every surface, casting warm light across the room. Wildflowers filled jars on her desk, despite the season. A blanket was spread on the floor with a basket of food from the hotel. "Robert," Beatrice breathed, taking in the scene. "What is all this?" "I am not good at romantic gestures," he admitted, looking nervous. "But I wanted to do something special for you, to show you how much you mean to me." They sat on the blanket and ate dinner by candlelight, talking and laughing as they always did. But there was an undercurrent of anticipation, a sense that something significant was about to happen. Finally, as they finished eating, Robert took both her hands in his. "Beatrice Ashford," he said, his voice steady despite the nerves racing through him. "I have been thinking about the day we met, when I saw you climb into that burning building to save a child. I thought then that you were the bravest person I had ever seen. Since then, I have learned that you are also kind, intelligent, dedicated, and more patient than anyone has a right to be. You have made me want to be better, to do more, to build something meaningful instead of just drifting from job to job." Beatrice felt tears welling in her eyes, sensing where this was leading. I am just a cowboy from Colorado with more determination than sense. But I love you. I love you so much that defending your name felt as natural as breathing. I love you enough that I want to spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt your worth or your character again." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring, simple silver with a small blue stone. "Will you marry me? Will you let me be the man who stands beside you always, who defends your name and your honor, who loves you for exactly who you are?" "Yes," Beatrice whispered, then louder. "Yes, Robert, yes, I love you too. I love your courage and your integrity, and the way you fight for what is right even when it would be easier to walk away. I love that you saw me when I felt invisible, that you believed in me when everyone else was ready to condemn me. Yes, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into a kiss that tasted like joy and promise and the beginning of something beautiful. They were married in February of 1883, in the same church where Robert had first approached Beatrice to tell her he did not believe the lies. It was a small ceremony, attended by the people who had proven themselves true friends during the scandal. Mrs. Chen and Mrs. Martinez helped Beatrice sew her wedding dress, a simple but elegant gown of cream-colored silk. Mr. Patterson gave her away, an honor he had requested as a way of making amends for his initial doubt. Robert wore his best suit, his hair neatly trimmed, looking nervous and happy and exactly like what he was, a good man pledging his life to a good woman. When they exchanged vows, promising to love and cherish each other through whatever challenges life might bring, everyone in attendance knew these were not just words. These two had already proven their commitment to each other in the hardest way possible. The reception was held at the hotel, with food and music and dancing. Even some of the people who had initially believed the lies about Beatrice came to celebrate, their presence a tacit acknowledgement that they had been wrong. Constance Whitmore did not attend, but her absence was not mourned. As Beatrice danced with her new husband, she thought about how much had changed in less than a year. She had arrived in Yerington as a lonely woman seeking a fresh start. She had been broken down by lies, betrayed by people she had tried to befriend, nearly destroyed by baseless accusations. But she had also found love in the most unexpected place, had learned that one person's courage could change everything, had discovered her own strength in the process of defending herself. "What are you thinking?" Robert asked, pulling her closer as the music slowed. "That I am happy," Beatrice said simply. "Despite everything that happened, or maybe because of it, I am exactly where I am supposed to be." "With me," he teased gently. "With you," she confirmed. "Always with you." They moved into the house that came with Robert's new position, a modest but comfortable dwelling on the Eastern Ranch. It was a 30-minute ride from Yerington, close enough that Beatrice could continue teaching at the schoolhouse. They furnished it slowly, with pieces purchased from the general store or made by Robert's own hands. He built her a bookshelf for the growing collection of teaching materials and novels she accumulated. She sewed curtains and quilts, making the place feel like home. Their first year of marriage was not easy. Building a new ranch from scratch required long hours and hard work. Robert was gone from dawn until dusk most days, overseeing construction, managing livestock, hiring and training ranch hands. Beatrice continued teaching while also maintaining their household, a juggling act that left her exhausted many evenings. But they made it work. They cherished the time they had together. The quiet evenings when they could sit on their porch and watch the sun set over the desert, the Sunday mornings when they rode to church together, the nights when they held each other and talked about their dreams for the future. In the spring of 1884, Beatrice discovered she was pregnant. The news brought tears of joy to both of them, though also some anxiety. They were still building their life together, still establishing Robert's new operation, still figuring out how to balance their responsibilities. Adding a child to the mix would complicate everything. But as Robert held his wife and felt the flutter of their baby moving beneath his hand, he knew they would manage. They always did. "What should we name him?" Beatrice asked one evening, lying in bed with Robert's arm around her. "Him." "You sound pretty confident about that." "Just a feeling," she said with a smile. "What about after your father? What was his name?" James Sullivan." Robert considered it. "James Sullivan Jr. has a nice sound to it. And if it is a girl, then we will name her after your mother." "What was her name?" "Catherine. Catherine Rose Ashford." "Catherine Rose Sullivan," Robert said softly. "That is beautiful." Their son was born in November of 1884, a healthy baby boy with his mother's gray eyes and his father's dark hair. They named him James as planned and called him Jamie. Robert held his son for the first time with tears streaming down his face, overwhelmed by the rush of love and protectiveness he felt for this tiny person. "I swear to you," he whispered to the sleeping infant, "that I will always defend you and your mother. I will make sure you grow up knowing that truth matters, that character matters, that standing up for what is right is worth any cost." Beatrice watched her husband with their son and felt her heart swell with love. This was the man who had defended her name when no one else would, who had fought for her honor and her reputation, who had proven that one person's courage could change everything. And now he was the father of her child, the partner she would build a life with, the love that made everything worthwhile. Motherhood meant that Beatrice had to temporarily stop teaching, though she missed her students terribly. The school board found a replacement teacher, a stern older woman named Mrs. Blackwell who lacked Beatrice's warmth, but was competent enough. Some of Beatrice's former students would ride out to the ranch to visit her, bringing news from town and showing her their schoolwork. She tutored them informally, unable to fully step away from teaching even while caring for an infant. As Jamie grew, the ranch prospered. Robert proved to be an excellent manager, fair with the men who worked for him and savvy about the business aspects of running a cattle operation. Mr. Donovan was pleased with his investment, and Robert's reputation in the territory grew. People knew him as a man of integrity, someone whose word could be trusted. The scandal that had nearly destroyed Beatrice became a distant memory, though the lessons from it remained. She had learned that reputation could be fragile, that lies could spread faster than truth, that courage sometimes meant standing alone against public opinion. But she had also learned that love could emerge from darkness, that one person's belief could make all the difference. That strength came not just from standing up for yourself, but from accepting help when it was offered. By the time Jamie was 3 years old, walking and talking and full of energy, Beatrice found herself pregnant again. Their second child, a daughter, was born in the summer of 1888. They named her Catherine, called her Kathy, and she had her father's dark eyes and her mother's smile. With 2 young children, life was chaotic and exhausting and absolutely perfect. Robert would come home after long days on the ranch to find his wife reading to their children, or playing games with them in the yard, or teaching Jamie his letters. He would watch them from the porch, filled with gratitude for the life they had built together. On quiet evenings after the children were asleep, Robert and Beatrice would sit together and talk about everything and nothing, the way they had since the beginning. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if I had not written that letter?" Robert asked one night, his arm around his wife as they rocked slowly on the porch swing he had built. "I try not to," Beatrice admitted. "It frightens me to think how close I came to losing everything. If you had not stood up for me, I probably would have left Yerington. I would have gone back to California or maybe somewhere else entirely, and we never would have found each other. I think we would have found each other eventually, Robert said thoughtfully. Maybe not here, maybe not the same way, but I believe some things are meant to be. You sound like a romantic, she teased gently. Only with you. He kissed the top of her head. You changed my life, Beatrice. Before you, I was just drifting. I had no real purpose, no reason to stay in one place or build something lasting. But defending you, fighting for you, gave me something to care about beyond myself. It made me want to be worthy of you. You have always been worthy, she insisted. From the moment you approached me in that church and told me you believed me, you proved your worth. You gave me hope when I had none. You defended my name when I could not defend myself. You showed me what real courage looks like. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the desert at night, the distant howl of coyotes, the chirping of crickets, the soft rustle of wind through the sage. I wonder whatever happened to Constance Whitmore, Beatrice mused. I heard she left Yerington not long after the scandal. Last I heard, she married some banker from San Francisco and moved to the city, probably happier there where she can be more anonymous. Robert shrugged. I do not wish her ill, but I also do not feel much sympathy for her. She made her choices. I try not to be bitter about what she did, Beatrice said, but sometimes I still get angry when I think about how easily she tried to destroy me, how little my life meant to her compared to her own petty jealousy. Being angry about it is normal, Robert assured her. What she did was wrong, and anger is a reasonable response to injustice, but we cannot let that anger consume us. We won, Beatrice. We built a good life despite what she tried to do. That is the best revenge. As the years passed, that good life continued to grow and flourish. Jamie started school when he turned 6, attending the same schoolhouse where his mother had taught. Mrs. Blackwell had retired, and the new teacher, a young woman named Miss Winters, had heard the story of Beatrice Ashford Sullivan and the cowboy who had defended her name. She treated Jamie with special kindness, aware that his mother had helped establish the school's reputation for quality education. Kathy followed her brother to school 2 years later, a bright child who loved learning as much as her mother did. Beatrice volunteered at the school when she could, helping with reading groups and tutoring students who struggled. It was not the same as being the teacher, but it allowed her to stay connected to the work she loved. Robert continued managing the Eastern Ranch, which had grown from a small operation to one of the most successful in the valley. He hired good men, treated them fairly, and built a reputation throughout Nevada territory as someone worth working for. Offers came periodically from other ranches looking for experienced managers, but Robert always turned them down. He had finally found a place that felt like home, and he had no desire to leave it. In 1892, when Jamie was 8 and Kathy was 6, Beatrice found herself pregnant once more. The pregnancy was harder than the previous 2, leaving her exhausted and unwell for months. Robert worried constantly, remembering stories of women who died in childbirth, fearing that he might lose the person who meant everything to him. But Beatrice was strong, and when their 3rd child was born in the spring of 1893, she survived the delivery despite complications. The baby, another son they named Thomas, came into the world small but healthy. Robert held his wife's hand as she recovered, whispering promises about how he would always protect her, always defend her, always love her. "You have given me everything," he said, his voice thick with emotion. 3 beautiful children, a home, a life worth living. I do not know what I did to deserve you, but I will spend the rest of my days being grateful for it. You defended my name, Beatrice reminded him, her voice weak but steady. When the whole town believed lies about me, you stood up and said the truth. You gave me my life back, Robert. Everything we have built comes from that single act of courage. As Thomas grew, joining his older siblings in the chaos and joy of childhood, the Sullivan family became well known throughout Yerington and the surrounding area. Robert was respected as a fair and honest businessman, someone whose word was his bond. Beatrice was admired as a dedicated mother and former teacher who had overcome scandal with grace and dignity. But it was the story of how they came together that people remembered most. It became something of a legend in Yerington, the tale of the schoolteacher who was falsely accused and the cowboy who defended her name. Parents told it to their children as an example of standing up for what was right even when it was difficult. Teachers used it to illustrate the importance of seeking truth over accepting gossip. And whenever someone asked Robert why he had gotten involved, why he had risked his own reputation to defend a woman he barely knew, he always gave the same answer. Because truth matters. Because people matter. And because sometimes the right thing to do is also the hardest thing, but that does not mean you should not do it. As the new century approached, Robert and Beatrice watched their children grow with pride and occasional wistfulness for how quickly time passed. Jamie was becoming a young man, tall and serious like his father, with plans to study law and become an advocate for people who could not afford proper legal representation. The story of his mother's false accusations had deeply affected him, instilling a passion for justice that would shape his entire life. Kathy was a natural teacher, patient and creative, already helping her younger brother Thomas with his schoolwork. She talked about becoming a teacher herself someday, following in her mother's footsteps. Beatrice encouraged her, knowing that education could open doors that might otherwise remain closed. Thomas, the youngest, was still finding his way. He loved the ranch, loved working with the animals and being outdoors. Robert suspected his youngest son would end up in ranching or farming, building a life connected to the land. On their 15th wedding anniversary in 1898, Robert took Beatrice back to the schoolhouse where he had proposed. It looked much as it had that night, though time had weathered the wood and new children had worn down the steps. They stood outside in the fading light, hands clasped, remembering. 15 years, Beatrice said softly. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime, and sometimes it feels like yesterday that you were standing in the Chronicle office demanding that they print the truth. Best decision I ever made, Robert said. Well, second best. The best was asking you to marry me. What made you so certain that you wanted to marry me? She asked, curious. We had only been courting for a few months. I knew the first time I kissed you, he admitted, right there on the street where anyone could see. I knew that I wanted to spend every day for the rest of my life making you smile, making you feel safe, making sure you never again experience the kind of pain those lies caused. I knew that defending your name was just the beginning, that I wanted to defend your heart and your dreams and your happiness always. Beatrice turned to face him fully, reaching up to touch his cheek. There was more gray in his hair now, more lines around his eyes, but he was still the man who had changed her life with his courage and conviction. You have done exactly that, she said. Every single day, you have made me feel loved and valued and safe. You have defended not just my name, but everything I am. I could not have asked for a better partner, a better father for my children, a better man to build a life with. They kissed there in the twilight, two people who had found each other through tragedy and built something beautiful from the ashes of scandal. The years continued to roll by, bringing changes and challenges and joy. The town of Yerington grew, adding new businesses and expanding its boundaries. The mining industry fluctuated, sometimes prosperous and sometimes struggling, but the ranching operations remained stable. Robert's eastern ranch became one of the cornerstones of the local economy, providing jobs and stability for dozens of families. Jamie went off to university in San Francisco to study law, writing home regularly with stories about his classes and his growing passion for defending the innocent. Kathy completed her own education and took a position teaching at the Yerington schoolhouse, bringing a warmth and enthusiasm to the role that reminded everyone of her mother. Thomas apprenticed with his father, learning the ranching business from the ground up. When Beatrice turned 45 in 1904, she looked back on her life with satisfaction and gratitude. The scandal that had nearly destroyed her 22 years earlier felt like it had happened to a different person in a different lifetime. She had built a rich, full life filled with love and purpose and meaningful work. Her children were grown, or nearly so, good people who understood the importance of truth and character and standing up for what was right. And through it all, Robert had been beside her. Her defender, her champion, her love. He had proven his vow over and over again, defending her name and her honor and her heart against anything that threatened them. Their love had deepened with time, growing from the passionate intensity of their early days into something more profound and enduring. On a warm summer evening in 1905, the Sullivan family gathered at the ranch house for Sunday dinner. All three children were there, along with Jamie's new wife, an intelligent young woman named Sarah whom he had met at university. The table was crowded and loud with conversation and laughter, exactly the kind of family gathering that Beatrice had dreamed of during her lonely early days in Yerington. After dinner, as the younger people cleaned up and chatted in the kitchen, Robert and Beatrice slipped outside to their favorite spot on the porch. The sun was setting over the desert, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. "Our family is growing," Beatrice observed, leaning against her husband's shoulder. "Soon there will be grandchildren, another generation of Sullivans. I hope we teach them the right things," Robert said thoughtfully, "about truth and courage and standing up for people who need defending." "They will learn by watching us," Beatrice assured him. "Just like our children did, just like the whole town did all those years ago when you refused to let lies stand unopposed." "I wrote one letter," Robert said, shaking his head slightly. "One letter saying what I believed to be true." "It does not seem like much when you look at everything that came after." "It was everything," Beatrice insisted, turning to look at him directly. "That letter changed my life, changed our lives, changed the lives of our children and everyone they will touch in the future." "Never underestimate the power of standing up for truth, Robert. It ripples outward in ways we cannot always see." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. Behind them they could hear their children laughing, could smell the coffee brewing for after-dinner conversation. This was their life, built on a foundation of courage and truth and unwavering love. "I would do it all again," Robert said quietly. "Every argument with Brennan, every confrontation with the Whitmores, every moment of uncertainty about whether people would believe me. I would do it all again in a heartbeat." "I know you would," Beatrice said softly, "because that is who you are. A man who defends what is right, who stands up for people who need someone in their corner, who understands that love means protecting the people you care about." "I love you, Beatrice Sullivan," Robert said, pulling her closer. "I have loved you since the day I saw you climb into that burning building. I loved you when I wrote that letter defending you. I loved you when I married you, when our children were born, every day we have spent together. And I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "I love you too," Beatrice whispered, tears sliding down her cheeks. "My defender, my champion, my heart." Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible, for believing in me when no one else would, for fighting for me when I could not fight for myself. Thank you for giving me this life, this family, this love." They kissed as the last light faded from the sky, two people who had found each other in the darkness and built something radiant together. The years that followed brought more joy and some sorrow, as all lives do. Robert's hair turned fully silver, and Beatrice's face gained the lines that came with age and laughter. They became grandparents multiple times over, as their children married and had babies of their own. The ranch continued to prosper under Robert's management, and eventually Thomas took over the day-to-day operations, allowing his father to slow down and enjoy a somewhat quieter life. Beatrice returned to teaching in her 60s, taking a part-time position helping children who struggled with reading. She found deep satisfaction in this work, using the wisdom gained from years of life experience to connect with students who felt lost or discouraged. She told them stories sometimes about how she had once faced terrible accusations and how a brave man had stood up for her, teaching them that truth would eventually prevail if you had the courage to fight for it. In 1920, Yerington celebrated Nevada's admission to statehood 56 years earlier with a large community gathering. Robert and Beatrice attended, now in their 70s, but still active and engaged with their community. During the celebration, the mayor gave a speech about the town's history and the people who had shaped it. "We have been blessed with citizens of strong character," the mayor said. "People who understand that a community is built on trust and truth, and the willingness to stand up for what is right." One of our finest examples is Robert and Beatrice Sullivan, whose story reminds us that one person's courage can change everything. The crowd applauded as the elderly couple stood, embarrassed but pleased by the recognition. Their grandchildren cheered loudly, proud of the legacy their grandparents had created. That evening, back at the ranch house that had been their home for nearly 40 years, Robert and Beatrice sat together on their porch as they had done countless times before. The desert stretched out before them, vast and beautiful in the starlight. "We have had a good life," Beatrice said, her hand in Robert's. "Better than I ever dreamed possible during those dark days when the lies were printed." "We built it together," Robert replied. "Every choice, every challenge, every moment of joy. We faced it all together, and that made all the difference." "You defended my name," Beatrice said softly, repeating words she had said many times over the years. "And in doing so, you gave me everything. You gave me back my life, my dignity, my hope. You gave me love and family and purpose. Everything good in my life traces back to that moment when you decided to stand up for truth." "I would make the same choice 1,000 times over," Robert assured her. "Defending you was not a sacrifice, Beatrice. It was a privilege. You are the best person I have ever known, and making sure the world knew that too was the most important thing I have ever done." They sat together as the night deepened, two old souls who had weathered storms and celebrated triumphs, who had built a life on a foundation of truth and courage and unwavering love. Their story had become legend in Yerington, passed down through generations as an example of what it meant to stand up for what was right. But for Robert and Beatrice, it was simply their life. The life they had built together after lies threatened to destroy everything. The life that proved truth could prevail over gossip, love could emerge from darkness, and one person's courage could indeed change the world. Robert Sullivan had defended Beatrice Ashford's name when she needed it most. And in doing so, he had not just saved her reputation. He had won her heart, built a family, and created a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. As they rose to go inside, their hands still clasped, Beatrice turned to her husband one more time. "Thank you," she said simply, for everything. For defending my name, for loving me, for building this beautiful life with me. Thank you for being exactly who you are. Thank you for letting me, Robert replied. Thank you for seeing past the simple cowboy to the man who loved you enough to fight for you. Thank you for saying yes when I asked you to marry me, for giving me children and grandchildren, for making every day of the past 40 years better than I deserved. They kissed there in the doorway, surrounded by the home they had made together, filled with the love that had sustained them through everything life had thrown their way. It was not the end of their story. They would live many more years together, would see more grandchildren born, would celebrate more anniversaries and milestones. But in that moment, standing in the home they had built on truth and courage and love, their story felt complete, because the most important parts had already happened. The lies had been exposed. The truth had prevailed. Love had conquered all obstacles. And a cowboy who defended a schoolteacher's name had proven that sometimes one person's courage was enough to change everything. Their love story would be told for generations in Yerington, Nevada. The story of how newspaper lies nearly destroyed an innocent woman, how a cowboy wrote the truth and said, "I will defend your name always," and how from that darkness emerged a love so strong and true that it became the foundation for an entire family's legacy. It was a story about courage and truth and the power of standing up for what was right. But most of all, it was a love story. A beautiful, heartfelt, enduring love story set against the harsh beauty of the Wild West, proving that even in the hardest places and the darkest times, love could flourish if people were brave enough to fight for it. And Robert Sullivan and Beatrice Ashford Sullivan had proven, every day of their lives together, that they were exactly that brave. Their story ended not with dramatic fanfares, but with quiet contentment, surrounded by family, secure in the knowledge that they had lived well and loved deeply, and made a difference in the world. They passed away within months of each other in 1925, having spent nearly 50 years as partners in every sense of the word. At their funeral, their children and grandchildren spoke about the lessons they had learned from watching Robert and Beatrice live their lives, about the importance of truth over gossip, about the courage it takes to stand up for someone when the whole world is against them, about how love is not just a feeling but a choice, made every day through actions and words and unwavering support. The newspaper that had once printed lies about Beatrice wrote a glowing obituary about both of them, noting their contributions to the community and the example they had set for generations. It was a far cry from the scandalous article that had started everything, but it was a testament to how completely they had overcome that darkness. Their graves were placed side by side in the Yerington Cemetery, under a tree that provided shade in the harsh desert sun. The headstone read simply, Robert Sullivan, 1856–1925, and Beatrice Ashford Sullivan, 1859–1925. He defended her name. She gave him her heart. Together they built a legacy of truth, courage, and love. And for generations after, whenever someone asked about the Sullivans, about the famous story of the cowboy and the schoolteacher, the people of Yerington would smile and say, "That was a love story for the ages. That was what true courage looked like." That was proof that one person's decision to stand up for truth could change everything. Because it had. One letter, one act of courage, one cowboy willing to defend a woman's name had set in motion a chain of events that affected countless lives. It had created a family, preserved a reputation, built a legacy, and proven that even in the Wild West where justice could be harsh and uncertain, truth and love could still prevail. Robert Sullivan had promised to defend Beatrice Ashford's name always. And he had kept that promise every single day of their lives together, in ways both large and small, through words and actions and unwavering devotion. It was exactly the kind of love story that people told around campfires and dinner tables, the kind that inspired others to be braver and kinder, and more willing to stand up for what was right. It was a story that proved love was not just about grand gestures, but about showing up every day, about defending the people you loved when they needed it most, about building a life together on a foundation of truth and trust and mutual respect. And in the end, that was the greatest legacy Robert and Beatrice Sullivan left behind. Not just the family they created or the businesses they built or the reputation they established, but the example they set. The proof that one person's courage could spark a love story that would last generations. The demonstration that defending someone's name was not just about clearing their reputation, but about showing them they were worth fighting for. Their story became part of Yarrington's history, taught to schoolchildren, referenced in sermons, cited as an example whenever someone needed a reminder about the importance of standing up for truth. The schoolhouse where Beatrice taught was eventually renamed the Ashford Sullivan School in honor of both the teacher who had loved her students and the cowboy who had defended her. And though Robert and Beatrice were gone, their love lived on. In their children and grandchildren who carried forward their values. In the town that remembered their story and tried to live up to their example. In every person who heard their tale and decided to be a little braver, a little kinder, a little more willing to defend truth over accepting easy lies. Because that was what Robert Sullivan had done on a day in 1882, when he read a newspaper full of lies and decided to write the truth. He had stood up for a woman who could not stand up for herself. He had defended her name when everyone else was content to believe the worst. He had proven that one person's courage could change everything. And in doing so, he had won the heart of Beatrice Ashford, had built a beautiful life with her, and had created a love story that would be remembered long after they were both gone. It was a story about the Wild West, about small towns and big injustices, about newspapers and reputations and the power of the printed word. But most of all, it was a story about love, about how love could emerge from the darkest circumstances, about how love gave people the courage to fight for each other, about how love, real love, meant defending someone's name and heart and dignity, always and forever. Robert Sullivan had promised to defend Beatrice's name always. And he had kept that promise until his last breath, proving that some vows were sacred, some loves were eternal, and some stories were worth remembering forever. Their love story ended where all great love stories end, with two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built something beautiful together, and who had loved each other so deeply and truly that even death could not diminish it. They had lived well, loved deeply, and left behind a legacy that would inspire generations. And in a small town in Nevada under the vast western sky, their story lived on. A reminder that truth mattered, that courage mattered, that defending someone's name could be the beginning of the greatest love story ever told. The end.